Estates podcast on all things real estate and Costa Rica. And today we're joined by Invicta Legal, previous podcast guest. Today we're expanding on some of the ideas and some of the topics we touched upon last time. And today we're joined by Juan Sanchez, Alberto Sainz, and Jorge Gonzalez. Thanks for coming to the podcast.
Thanks to you, Alonso.
Thanks for you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's great having you again. And perhaps to start off the podcast, last time we touched upon particularly like due diligence and the process, or the legal process of like real estate transactions in Costa Rica. And today we wanted to focus on something perhaps like more specific and different areas. And to start off, we wanted to talk about like the experience Invicta has had dealing with developments or with developers in Costa Rica, given the current like market state in the coastal areas.
Okay, so yes, in fact, we have a lot of experience. Recently, it has been more in the Central Valley, but now it's moving to the coast. And basically, you have to define either you are going to hire a developer or you're going to develop the property by yourself. So if you're going to hire a developer, the typical structure is that you have a land company, a land co, that it's a company incorporated in Costa Rica that will buy the land and will hire a developer that will take charge and will charge a fee. So that's the typical structure if you're not going to be the developer by yourself. If you're going to be the developer by yourself, there's two options. Either you're going to develop only one property, so you have only one company that will take charge of everything, and you will hire the employees and the engineers and architects and everything, and that will be included as part of the cost that you will include in order to define the price of the final product. Or if you're going to have several developments and you're going to have different partners in each of the developments, then you can have land companies, companies that will own like special purpose vehicles for each of the lands that will be acquired. And you can have like your main company that will act as developer and will charge a fee. The issue with that is that there's a tax issue. If you have a developer that it's gonna grant services or provide services to the land companies, then you have to pay a value-added tax of 13%, and that increases your cost. And you cannot include that or transmit that to the final client, because you will be out of market. So that at the end, that will be an additional cost for you. So the best option, if you can, and if you're going to develop the property by yourself, is to have only one company and have all the employees and everything inside, and you will be selling the product without paying this value-added tax. So that's the typical structure. The other that's related to the options you have for structuring from the corporate side. Then there's things you have to bear in mind is that you have to record at the Ministry of Economy, the MAKE in Costa Rica, if you're going to pre-sale. And you have to incorporate a trust where all the funds that the clients will be paying as part of the pre-sales will go. And there are some regulations on how can you access that funds and use it for the development. Unfortunately, not all the developers go to MAKE, so there's like an issue regarding competition. So some decide not to record at MAKE, but if you want to go by the rules, you have to record at MAKE and follow these regulations. That's like maybe in a nutshell. The other issue is there are different options for selling. You can either sell the lots and that's it, or you can sell the final product. And if you're going to sell the final product, especially homes, you can have two options. Either the developer sell the lots and then sign a construction agreement, or they sell the final product and what they do is that they transfer the lot and then they offer that they will finish the construction but as part of the sale. In this second option, there's no value-added tax, so that's more efficient from the tax side. That's in a nutshell the most relevant aspects for development.
Maybe just to add, one more point would be the structure through which the developer decides to organize the project. So in Costa Rica, like years ago, many developers will try to keep it simple. And instead of going through the whole process to approve like a condominium regime project, they would simply subdivide the mother farm, the bigger property, into smaller lots and try to keep it as simple as possible. As in everything in life, there are pros and cons on each option, right? Lately, the gated communities that have been properly structured as under the condominium regime have proved to add value, because you have like a more enforceable set of regulations, internal covenants, conditions, and restrictions, where you can actually enforce on all the owners, even like, construction committee, to control how they build, colors, architecture, style, design, height, construction setback, etc. So I would say probably the most popular structure right now, especially for high-end product, is probably going to be the condominium regime structure, where each and every buyer has to accept on the deed of purchase the rules of the condominium and will be basically governed by that internal private agreement. Any other structure, if there was any structure with regulations, will then depend on enforcement either through arbitration or judicial system. It could be set of reciprocal easements, etc., that have been historically used, but those are not that easy to enforce or have the whole community actually complying with all those rules.
And following on what Alberto is saying, if the developer is going to develop a big property, it can be set in stages. Following the condominium regime, you can have sub-condominiums, and that's the advantage that this has, is that if you don't have it structured that way, and if you want to change the size and everything, then you need to go to the homeowners association, the assembly of homeowners, and you need certain majorities that go, depending on what you're going to do, go from 2/3 to 100% of the owners of the condominium. If you do it with this structure that you have sub-condominiums, then the developer might have one of these parcels that might be subject to be converted into a sub-condominium, and he can do that without having to go to the homeowners assembly. So that's a big advantage if you want to do it in stages.
And also in the current market in Costa Rica, particularly like the investment in like the coastal zones, it isn't only about like the residential development, but also like mixed use and commercial developments. So I want to ask you about like any specifics that a developer has to take into account when embracing the idea of like developing themselves, but also like creating this like a commercial environment for their clients.
It has to do with the same that I mentioned before, just to touch that issue. You can do it with different stages, as I mentioned before. So you can have different rules. So you can say that, okay, this parcel or this unit is going to be for commercial use, and that sub-condominium will have its own regulations according to the use that you're going to give it.
Yeah. Well, in recent years, the tendency has been to develop mixed use. It will have to do on what area are you developing and what's the type of community that you want to establish. Of course, if it's a small subdivision or development, probably you can make some commercial areas, but it's not going to be that big. But if you're thinking about a big project, it's something that the buyers will always seek. Of course, they would like to have, entertainment, health, for example, gyms or exercise places. And that is something that has also increased the value in certain projects that have done that from the very beginning. But that will have to do depending on what you're trying to structure. The other thing of the condominium regime that it's very important is that you can set up rules based on what you want to have in the project. For example, if you want to have a very calm community with no commercial development, and for example only for the homeowners to be there, you can restrict, for example, the short-term rentals. But in another communities, probably that's going to be your sales pitch, right? Mm-hmm. So you want to have people investing so they can make some revenue on the property, but you have all that flexibility through the condominium regime. Or you can even have certain part of the project for specifics and the other one for a more resident-oriented development.
And what Jorge is mentioning is important because you can have certain regulations. For example, if you can do rentals or you cannot do rentals. Also, that if you are selling lots, you can define what are the type of architectural designs that you can have there, like let's say the contemporary or colonial or whatever you want. So that's something that you can define. You can also define the rules for the uses of the common areas. So you can have certain regulations for certain specific aspects. The other issue is that you have to designate a manager for the condominium, and it's better not to have the developer being the manager because there are certain conflicts of interests. So it's better to hire a professional manager. There in Costa Rica, there are several that are very experienced in this. So there needs to be a manager of the homeowner association. The homeowner association is something that sometimes it's not easy to have people from the US understand, because I think you don't have the same structure in the US. But the homeowner association is by default, once you constitute a condominium and record it at the registry, there's a homeowner association that it's composed by all the homeowners, and they're the ones that take the final decisions and can change the manager of the condominium and approve the budget, etc. And one final thing, going back to the structure, when you create a company to be the developer, you can have partners, and if you're going to have partners, then you should have a shareholders agreement where you establish what are going to be the rules that will govern the relationship. In things like if you want to sell the company, if you want to acquire debt, what will be the dividends policy, certain issues like tag along, drag along, and other issues related to the selling or transfer of shares. So that should be regulated in a shareholders agreement. And if you want to be more secure, you can have all the shares in a trust that will be the guarantee for the shareholders agreement. So that's a common structure used in Costa Rica and in the world as well.
For developers analyzing different options to subdivide and develop a bigger property, there's also another point to consider, which is, for example, regarding water. In many cases, water is not that easy to deal with, especially if you're going to do a whole development and subdivision. The condominium regime gives the developers the possibility of applying for an exception in the law where you can obtain a water concession for the condominium as a whole. And then the whole project will share the water coming from that water source, let's say a deep well drilled on the property. And then you get the concession for the whole condominium, which all the owners will share. When you do not do that, then you simply need to go through the route of the Water Institute of Costa Rica or the Water Association, any local water association that will have to basically take care of the whole aqueduct for all the lots being subdivided. So in terms of water, it could end up being another advantage of the condominium regime, giving you a little bit more flexibility as long as you have a good water source that you can tap into and apply for a concession.
And given all this institutional climate, as you mentioned, the interlinked processes that need to be that go into like developing here in Costa Rica, also how does that apply to like the financing part of things when dealing with developing, be it like a mixed use, commercial, or residential?
Financing for the project or financing for the buyers?
For the project first.
Well, yeah. You can have your own capital and raise it and have it secured before you start the development, or you can seek financing from a local bank or even an international bank, depending on where you come from and if you have the facilities to get a loan, even if you're investing money out of your country of origin. The banks are very open to finance projects, but they will request a very high pre-sale rate, probably above 50-60%. And it will have to have, like real sales, like with a relevant deposit that you know that it's very difficult that they will fall down. And when it comes to foreign investors, it gets a little bit more difficult because the banks here don't know the history of the developer and their income source. And sometimes it gets a little bit hard at the beginning, but if the project has its own projections, and it seems to be a good project, the banks will go over it. They will finance probably between 70 to 85% of the cost of the development. They usually don't finance the land acquisition. They will finance the construction, and sometimes they will try to get part of of the cake of the buyers. So they will, try to get the clients of the final buyers and get the long-term financing. The financing for the development is going to be a short-term financing, just enough to complete it and sell it in a normal and expected way. And then they will try to get the loans for the end buyers in the long term. But that's another complication that you may have if your buyers are not residents or Costa Ricans. There are some programs that the banks have been launching regarding people coming from abroad to buy, but it's still not as matured as the local markets. So it's something that even they can offer other options as private lenders that are willing to go for it, or if sometimes even the developer, if it has enough capital and oxygen to finance some of those buyers, they can do it, and they can structure it either through a mortgage or either through a trust agreement.
And going deeper in what Jorge mentioned regarding private lending, that's something that is very used in Costa Rica. Actually, we're very involved with structuring private lending solutions. And sometimes the developers like that because it's easier. You have to provide less financial information and less requirements. It's quicker. And currently, the market rates are not so far away from the bank rates and the private lending rates. The banks currently are around 8.5 to 9.5 in most of the banks. And in private lending, you are at 12. But some developers prefer to pay the 12 because they can move faster and are more flexible with that. And in private lending, the ones that we structure, the collateral is the property that is being developed. And there's a portion that can be financed. A portion can be used to financing the acquisition of the land, and the rest can be used to financing the construction, and it's dispersed upon the advance of construction. So there's an engineer hired by the lenders that will check the advance in the construction and will be approving the disbursements. So that's a good option. And regarding the financing to the buyers, as Jorge mentioned, there are basically three options. One is the seller's finance. The other one is the banking finance, and the other is the private lending. So those are mainly the three options, and the collateral is the same. Either you can use a mortgage or a trust. We recommend using a trust because you don't have to go to courts, and in Costa Rica courts are very slow, and in a trust you can foreclose through the trustee, and that will be quicker and easier.
Yeah, like if you're a developer, you run your numbers, and time is money as well. So in many occasions, when you run your numbers, you discover that private loan, just to get the ball rolling, even though it has a premium on the interest rate, because it's a higher one, like Renato well said, will end up representing a better scenario than sitting and waiting for the time to pass so that he can actually apply or receive the disbursement of a bank loan.
Sometimes they even use it as a bridge. So.
Yeah, normally they will be seen as bridge loans. I mean, 2 years, 3 years, whatever, as a bridge loan while they are ready to get the bank loan. The other really important point for a developer would be to put a lot of attention on if a loan is being structured, either private loan or a bank loan, would be the release price of the properties that will be subdivided on his project. The release price that will have to be paid by the developer when a lot is being sold to Alonso, and then if that lot in that community is, 1,000 square meters size, then a release price either per square meter or per property needs to be carefully checked, so that when the developer is running their its own numbers, he knows that with the rest of the money that he'll receive from the sales price, he will be good to go after paying the release price to the bank or to the private lender. That's a really important point to consider.
Well, earlier you mentioned about like the sales pitch part of like the developing process, and more given the current state of the market in areas such high demand as like the coastal areas, the idea of like a legacy property or like the property as an investment or as an inheritance becomes more and more popular, be it like from local buyers thinking about like their grandchildren, or international buyers that want to perhaps have a stake in what's currently happening in the market. What are perhaps some general guidelines about like estate planning and like inheritance that developers can offer and tell like their potential buyers?
Well, Okay, basically you have two options or three. One is that you can include that in your last will and testament, and according to the Costa Rican rules, if someone passes away, the probate procedure needs to be followed in the place where that person had the primary residency. So in most of the cases with foreign investors, they are not living permanently in Costa Rica. So you will have to follow a probate procedure in their country of origin, and then you have to go through the Ministry of Foreign Relations in Costa Rica and then to court. So that's a little bit slow. And also, when you have to go to courts and follow a probate procedure in Costa Rica, the legal fees are it's a sliding schedule, but basically they are around 5%. So it's expensive.
On the value of the assets.
On the value of the assets and based on an appraisal. And based on the market value determined by an appraisal by a third party. And in addition to that, you have to pay the transfer tax if it's a property owned directly. That it goes like it's like 1.5 plus 1.25 of legal fees, so it's like 2.75% in addition. So at the end, it will be like 7.5 or even 8. That will be the cost of adjudicating the estate to the heirs. The other option is having a trust, and you can include this either in a trust that you create especially for the assets that are owned in Costa Rica, and you can transfer the shares of the companies that own the properties, or you can transfer directly the properties, but that has an expense. You have to pay the transfer tax, and according to the law, you pay the transfer tax on the rates that I mentioned before. Or if you are transferring the shares, if there's a change of control, then you have to pay 1.5% for the indirect transfer tax. So it also has some expenses. There are ways that you can try to structure it in a way that you don't have to pay that, but that you have to go into detail depending on the specifics of the client. And the other option is to have the company that owns the assets in Costa Rica being owned by a company in the States or a trust in the States, so you can have that that will follow the structure that you already have defined in the States or in the country where the investor lives. So if the investor has a estate planning trust in the States, the company in Costa Rica can be part of that estate planning trust, or it can be a subsidiary of the company that they have designated as their holding company.
Something important based on words used by U.S. clients, when we need to describe these estate planning trusts, these are like revocable living trusts, right? So if you, Alonso, prepare a estate planning trust today, you may have the following list of assets, and your heirs could be receiving in equal portions or different percentages. You can modify that as much as you want during your lifetime, so that while your life evolves and the assets that you hold and that you entrust and your heirs grow up older or whatever, legal age, minors, etc., you can modify the instructions as many times as you want, very easily. And then, you can even appoint like committees, so that if you become unable to act, or if you pass away, which ultimately is the reason why you're doing this, you can appoint people you trust in to be like a committee to make decisions on behalf of people that would be appointed as heirs, but that are not of legal age until they turn 18 in Costa Rica, for example. Or you can even set rules for college and expenses for education, etc.
And sorry, and there's another option in Costa Rica. If you don't want to go to courts, and if there are no minors involved and there's no contention, you can do it through a notary public. So that will be a quick process as well. It will be similar, a little bit slower than the trust, but faster than the judicial process. But still, you have to pay the same expenses that I mentioned, because the same rates apply.
And if at any time there's any type of conflict
between
the parties, you have to take the file to the court. So
This is all
you always
related
have that
with the
risk.
probate process related with the will. So
Yeah,
not with the estate planning trust.
Exactly, it has to do with the cases
With a will.
where the people leave a will. So yeah, that will be a risk that you will face if you go that way.
And based on everything that we have been mentioning, if someone is interested in developing property in Costa Rica, having the good advisors is a key aspect. So first of all, having the good brokers that can guide you on what property makes sense to acquire, how's the market today, and what makes sense to invest today. So you need a very good experienced and good broker. You need very experienced attorneys regarding real estate. And also you need a good builder and someone that will have that good team of engineers, environmental experts, everything that will tell you exactly what do you need. And these people need to get involved in the due diligence process, because what we have seen is that sometimes people come and just because they like a property they acquire, and there are a lot of things that will be obstacles for developing that property and will make the project being a very bad investment.
And that's a really good point, because besides the obvious clean title and zoning regulations that will always be checked by, in theory, by any attorney with some experience in real estate law, developers need to be really careful and need to dig deep during the due diligence phase on environmental aspects and water. Because in the end, you may end up purchasing a really nice property with great potential for development. But if there's no water in areas like Guanacaste, where the distances could be really really far away from the water source, it could be millions and millions of colones, or even hundreds of thousands of dollars just to bring water, legal water, and it could take a long time. And environmental matters in Costa Rica are taken very seriously. And anybody breaching on environmental regulations, that falls into the criminal category. So you don't want to risk that side of it.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for this very information-packed episode of the Costa Rica Real Talk. If someone that was listening wants to reach out and learn about more of your services, what's the best way of doing that?
They can go to our website, invicta.legal, invicta.legal, and they will find us, our contact numbers and info.
Our email addresses are our name dot the last name at invicta.legal. So Alberto Sáenz, Juvenal Sanchez, and Jorge Gonzalez again.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Juvenal, Alberto, and Jorge, for coming to a podcast and sharing all these valuable insight for developers and anyone that's interested in the Costa Rican real estate market.
Okay, thanks again for having us. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you enjoyed the conversation, you can follow us on social media at Costa Rica Real Estate, and listen to all our backlog of episodes in your favorite streaming platform at Costa Rica Real Talk.